Hello, everyone. I guess we can now start. Hopefully, everyone can hear me online, but many thanks to all of you for joining us today, both virtually and in person. It really is a pleasure to be here. Allow me first to start by introducing myself. I'm Nikki Ignatiou. I'm the Senior Humanitarian Policy and Research Advisor. And we have a really exciting panel ahead of us with esteemed colleagues and friends who are joining us from Ethiopia, Romania, Poland, and Myanmar, as well as the Government of Ireland and UN Women. I will be chairing this panel and will introduce our speakers before they speak. But before I allow me to say a quick few words. This Women, Peace and Security Month, it is important for us to recognize all the compounding crises and emergencies across the world. A wide nod to our colleagues, both from Ukraine and other parts of East Africa, who are unable to join us today, both due to visa restrictions, but also due to escalations in their context. At ActionAid, we work with women's rights and women-led organizations who are at the center of humanitarian action and who have led responses time and time again. We see their leadership in supporting their communities and beyond to respond to acute humanitarian needs and to the need for health and communities in a number of occasions. We know that women leaders play a crucial role in building trust and providing a bridge to reaching those. Their community knowledge and context specifics are best placed to do this. However, as I'm sure a lot of you will not be surprised, we know that their roles are often not recognized. And even further in conversations around women, peace, and security, where the roles of women and youth in peace processes are overlooked despite their leadership in humanitarian response, action, mitigation, and recovery. Their broader and intergenerational concept of peace and the international community's commitments to the UN Women, Peace and Security and Youth and Security agenda should consider this. What we have seen during WPS presents a challenge to humanitarian actors and for the international community to live up to its women, peace, and security ambition of participation, prevention, protection, relief, and recovery for women and girls in conflict-affected settings, to meaningfully engage and their organizations for what they are, not as beneficiaries, but as partners, and to see women, girls, and their organizations as the original first responders who saves lives in crises, and their community-led knowledge and advocacy for change. The WPS agenda sets out a framework for this kind of cross-sectoral work across the 4 pillars, demonstrating the need for national programs to have this intersectional approach with an understanding of the humanitarian development nexus. Today's panel will focus on women's leadership in humanitarian action and will give a platform to the work of women leaders and the women's rights organization that ActionAid works with in Ethiopia, Myanmar, Poland, and Romania, in responding to these and doing those linkages up with WPS. I'm excited to start this conversation with all of us here today, and I'll start with opening remarks from Jason Robinson, who is the Deputy Director of the Conflict Resolution Unit at the Irish Government. He joined us from the First Secretary in Ireland from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, which focuses on issues around women, peace and security, and women, peace and security. The floor is yours, Jason.
Cool. Yeah, we're working. Okay, yeah, we'll stick to the ones working so far. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you so much for inviting us to speak today. We're really pleased to get the opportunity to hear from all the participants and to have these discussions. I think for us, today is a really great opportunity to look at the 2 themes together that have been outlined and really interrogate whether we are acting sufficiently on their interlinkages. I'm looking forward to going back to my colleagues back in Dublin with some of the considerations that we come forward today and maybe some of the questions and some of the recommendations on how to move forward. I say 2 themes because too often women's leadership and humanitarian action are viewed separately, and it's something we'll probe more today and see how we can bridge the gaps in that regard. In Ireland's Department of Foreign Affairs, I work closely on the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. We know how vital women's leadership is to building societal stability and inclusive peace. This applies no less to humanitarian action. The WPS agenda provides a fantastic example of what can be achieved in terms of enabling and embedding women's participation and leadership over the longer term. We know that progress on the WPS agenda is not happening fast enough and more urgency is needed. I think anyone who would have read the latest Secretary General's report that's made it abundantly clear the backsliding and the anti-gender movement and the numerous obstacles to full implementation of the agenda. Yet at the same time, we know there have been notable achievements and we must recognise and build on these. In the 22 years since 1325, the number of national action plans across the globe is still increasing, and the agenda is becoming a common part of how more and more states operate. It is building precedent and credibility all the time, and I think this is vitally important that we recognise this. However, we also recognise the need for urgency too. This is where I think today's discussion can offer a lot of value. How do we ensure we include those important principles around women's leadership, which Ireland is fully committed to, are part of the picture when we are in emergency mode? And I think that's one of the key questions we're grappling with today. For us, partnerships, particularly at the local level, are key to ensuring implementation of the agenda. We are always trying to find ways in which we can meaningfully support women-led and women's rights organisations, especially at the grassroots level. The Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund has been one avenue for this. We are delighted to see the work of the fund go from strength to strength in terms of offering capacity building and institutional support to local women's organisations which are active in the humanitarian and peace building space. I'm looking forward to hearing more from Rita around this in her closing address. And we really think the fund is a key exemplar to look to on these questions. Colleagues of mine recently saw the transformative work on the ground in Moldova, where the fund is supporting women's meaningful participation in response to the immediate humanitarian and protection needs resulting from Russia's ongoing war of aggression in Ukraine. Ireland has, as many of you might be aware, been a vocal supporter of empowering local peace builders and local actors, especially women and youth. We are currently working to increase the proportion of our funding being dispersed at the local level. In our partnership with the International Rescue Committee, we have built in funding support for local organisations in the 5 African countries where the programme operates, and agreed with the IRC to allocate 20% of each country budget to support women-led and women's rights organisations and networks. I'll now turn to some of Ireland's guiding policy on these matters and how that manifests in our actions. To situate today's discussion, I want to set out 2 guiding principles which I imagine the whole panel will agree with. 1, gender equality is a fundamental human right, and 2, gender equality is a fundamental condition for sustainable global development. This is why gender equality and the empowerment and leadership of women and girls is at the heart of Ireland's foreign and international development programme. It is fundamental for the transformation required to reaching the furthest behind first and to achieving the sustainable development goals. We know that globally, women and girls remain the hardest hit by the effects of extreme poverty, conflict, and climate change. Ireland's approach to gender equality is informed by our own national journey and by the political and social transformation relating to gender equality that has occurred and continues to take place in Ireland. Ireland has benefited from the part that the women played in our peace process, from the women's coalition who were critical to the achievement of the Good Friday Agreement to the day-to-day work of women leaders in communities. A key learning for Ireland has been the importance of strengthening women's representation. This has been adopted into our international development work and Ireland's wider foreign policy. Ireland has a long-standing reputation in championing gender equality on the international stage. And as mentioned, I think it's become abundantly clear Ireland's membership of the UN Security Council has been an opportunity for us to highlight and focus on women and on gender equality and how these can contribute to achieving peace and security. During our Security Council presidency, 16 of the 17 briefers we brought to the Council were women. This was recognised by UN Women as a new record for women's participation at the Council. And again, together with Mexico and Kenya, we initiated the WPS presidency trio with a series of commitments around mainstreaming WPS across our respective presidencies. And we've been very pleased to see that being built on by other member states. And we're hoping that this becomes a trend that continues in the coming years. We also co-facilitated the negotiations on Agenda 2030 and played a critical and strategic role in ensuring consensus for a standalone goal on gender equality at SDG 5 and for the integration of gender equality across all the SDGs. Ireland is also consistently ranked by the OECD DAC as among the member countries with the highest gender equality focus in official development assistance. A Better World, Ireland's international development policy, adopts a twin-track approach to progress gender equality as a core policy priority. We've committed to scale up our engagement to integrate gender equality across all our interventions in our wider foreign policy, while at the same time, we've also committed to increasing allocations to interventions directly dedicated to achieving gender equality. At the Generation Equality Forum in 2021, Ireland committed to investing at least €42 million in feminist and women's rights organisations and women peacebuilders over the next 5 years. I'll now turn to the question of the HGB nexus and women's leadership role in connecting actors and work across the three pillars. In line with the theme of today, Ireland is committed to increasing a gender-responsive humanitarian response, including in the context of working to reduce humanitarian need. We recognise the importance of supporting local women's organisations and leadership in humanitarian response, particularly vulnerabilities faced by women, girls, and boys in emergency settings. In 2021, Ireland became a signatory and board member of the WPS Humanitarian Action Compact, a commitment that we believe can accelerate implementation of the agenda, promote gender equality, and advance women's leadership. We have committed to advocate that all supported humanitarian appeals and crisis and conflict recovery programs are based on inclusive consultations with women and women's groups and on gender analysis. We are committed to advancing work on sexual and reproductive health systems in emergency settings, to increasing investment in education in emergencies with a particular focus on girls' education, and to preventing and responding to gender-based violence. We've also committed to allocating specific funds for the identified needs of women and girls in all their diversity in conflict and in crisis-affected settings. This includes ensuring that they are fully consulted and engaged in decision-making around humanitarian development and peace efforts, providing resources to specialised agencies to ensure that safe spaces are available for women and girls and allow for critical psychosocial healing for those who have survived traumatic experiences has to be part of a comprehensive humanitarian response. We recognise that peacebuilding, humanitarian, and sustainable development work operate along a continuum. We are always willing and eager to listen to ideas on how that continuum can be better reflected in our work. Ireland is committed to working in partnership with civil society, internationally and domestically, in achieving our WPS vision and goals. With that in mind, I'll finish up and let the rest of the speakers take the floor. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Jason. Really interesting to hear the Irish government's commitments around this, but also thank you for flagging so much around the importance around gender equality and what that means around partnerships and the way that we work with local women's organizations. I'm now going to pass the floor to Tinabeth Rahane, who's actually joining us virtually. Tinabeth is Country Director for ActionAid Ethiopia, that promotes and works towards ensuring gender justice, good governance, and poverty eradication in Ethiopia. In her 25 years of experience in development, Tinabeth has been human rights advocate and civil society leader. She is Vice President of Ethiopian Civil Society Council that represents more than 4,000 civil society organizations in Ethiopia. She served in various organizations as board in her ambition to create strong and vibrant civil society organizations with human rights defenders. She has worked through experience in DRC and Zambia in leadership capacities, and she has served in 8 local and international NGOs. Tinabeth, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you please confirm that you are hearing me okay?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Great. Thank you so much. With many thanks to my esteemed colleagues on the panel and those of you joining us with virtually and in person, it's a pleasure to be here today with you. I am delighted to be joined by colleagues from Romania, Ukraine, Poland, Myanmar, the government of Ireland, and the UN Women. I hope to continue our partnership with you all going forward. As you know, I need to drop off the call shortly due to competing demands, but it's really a pleasure to speak with you and outline how we in East Africa are working on this important agenda and how women are continuing to lead in humanitarian situation and peace building as their severity and need increases both here in the Horn of Africa and globally. The Women, Peace and Security agenda, as we know, was born from the feminist movement, brave women who stood between peace and conflict, who pushed for peace and pushed for our rights to be recognized. My colleagues and sisters in Sierra Leone and Liberia stood firm decades ago on their right to participate and ensure that they have a say in the peace they wanted and needed. But this work is not only about women and girls' role in the peace building and humanitarian action. That is important as well needed, but it is also about the impact that humanitarian situation and conflict has on women and girls, on our rights to live in peace at home, at work, in the public spaces, and on our role in preventing conflict and humanitarian emergencies before they begin. We know that women are leaders, but we also know that patriarchal systems and structures prevent their leadership and prevent that leadership from having the space and recognition it deserves. In the Horn of Africa, my colleagues and I work with incredible women leaders who are leading the way by challenging the status quo and dismantling norms, beliefs, and systems, and whose right to participate should be recognized, funded, and supported. Regarding women on the front line and their leadership, the women that we work with in the Horn of Africa often work in formal and informal organizations that are underfunded and sometimes not funded at all, other than the support from organizations like us, ActionAid. They work at pace to identify the needs and experiences of women and girls, and often community members, and quickly provide the service that they need. In some cases, this is non-food items, for instance, to ensure they can set up new temporary shelters. In others, it might be for maternal health service outreach or for violence for violence against women and girls legal services. Because, of course, we know very well from COVID-19, the VOW increased during local, national, and global emergencies. It was a moment that we have witnessed that our decades of work regressed because of COVID-19, where girls were wedded at their early age. But it also includes advocating for health centers to remain open and schooling to continue in humanitarian situation, or for safe access to water points, which usually makes women and girls vulnerable and expose them for violence and other harmful traditional practices. All the while, we know that women eat last and least. This is not because of innate, loving, mothering, peaceful view of the world, but because gender and patriarchal norms determine it. As women and girls work to provide services and push for peace, they are changing these norms and demonstrating that women have the right and ability to be active in the peace building and humanitarian responses. So what is needed is for women and girls to achieve their full potential in peace building. There needs to be a political will. Space needs to be made at the table for them to access decision-making spaces, make sure peace building addresses the rights, the needs, and experiences of women and girls, and for agreements and decisions to deliver on those. It also requires quality funding that is long-term, flexible, and for their own priorities. Too often, funding is short-term. Women's rights organizations are left with the crumbs of donor funding that enables them to implement only short-term, 6 months, 3 months projects, and not the long-term systemic change they want and needed. Funding is often also tied closely to the priorities of donors. Women's rights organizations are focused to implement programs on violence against women and girls, or peace, or economic empowerment in silos, rather than a program that they design that connects all of these fundamental rights issues, and it has a comprehensive nature. It also requires strengthening of their agency, where women and girls are given the space and the time to exercise their rights and ensure that peace and programs deliver on their needs and expectations. We also need to ensure that funding is unlocked quickly. In the Horn of Africa, we are experiencing an acute emergency and compounded in its nature. We need the world to look at all humanitarian and peace-building situations in the same way and ensure that the funding required to meet the need to deliver in a timely way. We are waiting. Fundamentally, we need to change the patriarchal systems of exclusion that meant that women cannot access decision-making spaces, and this cannot be achieved with short-term projects. That's really what we mean by quality funding that really enables the women and their agencies to unlock these systems for sustainable change. Climate is another agenda. As climate changes and the impacts of that are felt by more and more people, we need everyone. Women are working on to negate this. They are leading. We need to ensure that they are funded to do so and their rights are upheld. They do so. So in conclusion, as this situation in the Horn of Africa grows deep, we need to work together to ensure that the amazing work of women on the front line is recognized, funded, and that they are given the space for their work to grow and thrive. And most importantly, for them to be on the table when most negotiations and decisions are made. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Genevieve. Really important notes there about the compounding crises and how climate change links in with that, but also thank you for flagging women's leadership roles, both at the formal and informal spaces. I think that's something that's often forgotten. I will now be passing on to Marta. Marta Lambart is a Polish women's rights activist and founder of the Polish Women's Strike. Active since 2016 in widespread protest against tightening abortion laws, she has been targeted by the government with arrests and legal charges and faced death threats from opponents of the protest. Her work has also included advocating for equal rights for members of Poland's LGBTIQ community and for people with disabilities. Marta, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having us. I would say dzień dobry, but we say Slava Ukraini now. That's how Poland looks like, so Slava Ukraini. Yes, I'm representing a civic movement that started in 2016 when the total ban on abortion was put on the table in the Polish parliament. Very brutal, very scary bill. And in 2016, we managed to stop that. People protested in 150 cities. It was called Black Bloc protest back then. And that's how the movement started, with the abortion ban protest and with the success that was there when we managed to stop the ban. But the attempts to further restrict abortion in Poland were ongoing for many years and are ongoing with the government that we have. Because we had a ban on abortion with just 3 exceptions. Now, after the decision of the politically hijacked Constitutional Court, abortion is almost practically banned. It's officially it's inaccessible in Poland. But in the meantime, very soon, we became the movement of protest for all the issues that were on the table socially. So we protested about women's rights in general, not only reproductive rights, but also against domestic violence, and organized about women's rights in general, about LGBT rights, supporting minorities groups, supporting people with disabilities, supporting workers who protested. We did a huge part of our actions were also protests and actions about judiciary independence and the rule of law in Poland, which are the root of all that's happening because of the destroying of the whole system. We've organized about 7,000 actions and protests and initiatives and projects in the last 6 years. And of course, it comes with a price. I'm talking about 6,000 people who are being repressed, charged, investigated, brought to court. I myself, I'm over on 105 court cases. The biggest ones, the criminal ones, are up to 8 to 10 years in jail. And that's why the judicial independence and the rule of law in Poland is so important, because the courts are the last resort. And the Constitutional Court that was hijacked is the enemy. This is the way where the Polish government just strips human rights out one after another. And so we are looking at civic movement of huge proportions. We're now in 600 cities, forming in spite of the conditions. So this is the interesting story of a society that didn't care, was not engaged when the conditions for that were much more comfortable. We're now in this repressed situation and people get much more engaged. And this is also the outcome of the fact that we had been building democracy that was based on the rule of law, judicial independence, free media, free elections, but no human rights. We didn't have the safety measures, and this is the price that we pay now. But all of that, all the things that happened to me and to other activists and are happening on a daily basis, the question always is it worth it? It's worth it because we actually win. Of course, we have the legal situation now that is very scary. We have the almost total ban on abortion. We have many other restrictions. But in the same time, the support for legal abortion changed from 37% in 2016 to 69% in 2020. And we have the whole political scene, the opposition political scene that is conservative in Poland, supporting legal abortion instead of supporting the ban as it was a couple of years ago. We started at 18% support for marriage equality in Poland 6 years ago, now it's 52%. So we're looking at a society that has actually acknowledged that human rights are important and wants them to be safe and wants them to be secure. So this is the change, and this is the change that happened first in the society and then happened in the political scene, and these are the successes. And Poland also is the fastest secularizing country in Europe, which is something that I'm really proud of. So this is the situation that we have. And why do we do everything? Because we're located mostly in small and middle-sized cities, which means that people who are engaged are doing everything. They protest about women's rights, they protest about judicial independence, they protest about climate justice, and so on, so on. So this is a natural way. And this is something that is very hard to acknowledge in the system, because the system likes things to be separated. The donors like things to be separated. The institutions like things to be separated. And life isn't separated, life is life. Life, it is what it is. So when the war started, Russian war in Ukraine started, we did what we usually do when something happens and someone needs help to organize and have services provided to them. We are running about 30 humanitarian aid points all over Poland. We are supporting 500 other humanitarian aid points. We doubled our budget, yearly budget, and we got money for this. We managed to fundraise also for that. And about 60% of our capacity is now response to the war. And we are one of many organizations in Poland. I'm talking about 10,000 people who did something else before the war. They were fighting for proper education. They were fighting for persons with disabilities rights. They were fighting for many, many causes. And now they are, at least half of their work is doing the war response. Because they are the natural leaders, they are the natural community organizers, they are the natural points of hope. And this is something that is totally unrecognized, with exceptions. So we are the lucky organization that ActionAid actually came to the rescue at some point. Because with us, you cannot get the support to provide services of the humanitarian field, because we're not a humanitarian aid organization. So in spite of the fact that we are the responders and we are doing that, we're outside of the system. We cannot get the funding, we cannot get the support, we don't exist. And on the other hand, when we have donors and help and assistance from organizations that deal with human rights, with women's rights, we're not allowed to do just a humanitarian response, so to provide food and shelter, because this is not working on women's rights in general, because we should be doing only reproductive assistance or anti-domestic violence, like the very specialized projects. And this life is different. What we do in our humanitarian aid points is that we provide the humanitarian assistance, the food and shelter and hygienic materials, and we provide reproductive assistance, and we provide information about where to go if you're a victim of violence. And it doesn't matter if it's a domestic violence situation or it's a war violence situation, it's all connected. And what ActionAid did was actually listening to how it actually really looks like in Poland. And I don't even want to think how hard it was to actually convince the people in the system that this is how it should be done. So that global organization like ActionAid should be actually allowed to choose the local partners and national partners based on what is happening, acknowledging what it's doing. And I'm really happy that this exception happened and we are getting so much help. But it shouldn't be exception. It should be a rule. It should be a rule because we are a very big, strong organization. We can risk the money. We can wait for support. We can make many decisions. We can move things around. We have so many people supporting us. But for small people, for small organizations, small collectives, organizing, they just don't have the resources for that fight. To explain the obvious, to say all the time, to explain why they should be acknowledged, why they should be recognized. It shouldn't be like that. First responders in crises like we have in Poland after the Russian war broke, and we have 2 million newcomers that we accepted in Poland and we're supporting in Poland because it's us, it's the civic society, it's not the Polish government doing that, absolutely not. So that's the thing. And I guess that's, I don't know how much time do I have? Okay. So that's the core recommendation, because as with everything else, I always say that we manage with abortion services. Abortion is accessible in Poland. We have very professional collectives that provide abortion, and we have the national helpline that is the most recognized number after the police and fire brigades, 2229, 22597. Everybody knows that number. And we have all the things covered, but this is just us. And there are groups, initiatives, and collectives that cannot fight that fight aside from everything else. And also, the fact that we are not recognized, and many organizations are not recognized as the part of the humanitarian work and the humanitarian response in situations like we had in Poland, means that we are looking at the possible collapse of the civic society that has been flowing so much and thriving, because we're doing just a part of our core work, because we're doing the war response. And so all the civic organizations are doing just a part of their core work, and it shouldn't be like that. They should have resources to follow what they were doing before the war, but also provide the humanitarian assistance. But for me, I think the key issue is, as I said, the rule, not an exception. It shouldn't be an exception. The ActionAid, any other global organization, humanitarian organizations, human rights organizations, ability to choose their national and local partners should be based on trust, should be based on this general acceptance that we're working not only with the ones that are registered in the system, not only the ones who have the official experience in dealing with humanitarian crises, but those who actually do the work, those who were there from day one, those who provide assistance, the people that we can meet and we can see that they are doing their jobs. It has to change. And I saw that change happening. I already saw that, because when we started, we were just a civic movement. We didn't have the registered entity. We weren't a foundation. It was many years ago. And one of our major donors, partners, which is International Planned Parenthood Federation, they didn't force us to get legal immediately. They didn't force us to pretend that we're doing workshops and trainings. They treated street activism, street actions as advocacy that works, because it works, 57 to 69%, that actually works. They changed, they did the whole amazing work of changing their own thinking, their own approach, their own procedures globally to actually acknowledge that like civic movements exist and they need support and they need assistance. And I cannot also imagine how much work it demanded from them to change their approach, to change their thinking, and to convince their donors and their supporters to accept that this is what they do, this is how they see the reality looks, and they want to adjust to reality. So this is what we're talking about. This is adjusting to reality with choosing partners. And it's especially human rights and women's rights organizations. Because obviously when the crisis happens, it's the human rights activists, it's the women's rights activists basically also, and mostly, especially in Poland, that are doing the work that they've started in some other field, but the scheme of supporting people who need assistance is the same. So that's that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marta. Yeah, we're very happy to have you, know the incredible work that you do, and really important to talk about civic movements and what that means around judicial independence, but also for flagging these silos that are up. And I even jotted it down as you were saying, life is not separated, and what does that mean when we're outside the system? And I think that that's really important to consider about the layers when we do talk about the humanitarian development and peace nexus. Our next panelist today is Laura Albo, and Laura Albo is the president of Romania Women's Lobby and vice president of the European Women's Lobby. In 2022, she has been elected as a member of Grevio, the independent expert body responsible for monitoring implementation of the Council of Europe's Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence against Women and Domestic Violence by the parties. Laura, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and just a rectification, I was Vice President of European Women's Lobby until last year, but it was a very good and exciting time. I actually represent two NGOs from Romania. One is Community Safety and Mediation Center, which is an organization based in Iași, northeastern part of Romania, near the border with Ukraine and Republic of Moldova, working in the field of assistance of women victims of gender-based violence and domestic violence for 22 years. And the other organization, which you already mentioned, where I'm also president, is Romanian Women's Lobby, which is the national coordination in Romania for European Women's Lobby. For those of you who are not aware, European Women's Lobby is the largest umbrella organization of almost 2,500 NGOs around Europe. And before the crisis in Ukraine started and actually affected all of us in a way in which we weren't expected, because as organization dealing with violence, internal violence, we were not involved in the women, peace and security area in a direct way. We had an attempt in 2010 to actually reorganize our national action plan for women, peace and security in a project which was not funded back then because it was not a priority. When a country is not directly involved in a crisis like the war in the proximity, the situation of women and girls in the times of war is not considered as being very important things to deal with. And always strategies and national action plans are very nicely put on the paper, but not necessarily are backed up with the real actions and real budgets. And without budgets, we always say that it's not something a state could declare anything they want. If they are not putting the money where the word are is useless. Now with the help of ActionAid, which actually we met for the first time this year, because also Romania being not a country in which you have support and development, because we are a country which is member in EU, we didn't have this kind of approach before. And as my colleague Marta said about Poland, Romania was in the same situation in which we as women's human rights organizations and also as service providers, we were dealing with the issues in a classical manner. And when women and girls and children from Ukraine entering our city and our region, we have the immediate need to respond properly to this. And in terms of how and when this dealing with the national action plans arise again. And so I don't know if probably it's not accessible, but for those of you who are interested in seeing our materials, we will organize on the 3rd of November in Bucharest an event of celebration, 22 years for Women, Peace and Security agenda, in which we have confirmation from many stakeholders and also women NGOs, and we hope women from Ukraine will be present. But beyond that, we are working together with our colleagues from Moldova and Ukraine women's NGOs, because due to the fact that they were invited to join EU, we are thinking that we could support the establishment of women organizations, coordination to join European Women's Lobby, because being part of European Women's Lobby for us was a very great help in terms of accessing information, support, advocacy, lobby, and so we will work with the women NGOs on that. Also, in terms of direct support with women's and their children coming from Ukraine, we open a service in the transit center in Iași, a helpline which is called Helena Helpline, accessible in Russian, Ukrainian, Romanian, and English, and also Magyar, because we have a minority speaking Magyar women. Not in Iași, but helplines are accessible everywhere. But because of that, our message to the states and to the donors is the fact that we need, as Marta said, to integrate our work, because women on the move, like Ukrainian women, are not the only vulnerable women. We have women on the move which are trafficked from Romania and Moldova as well, and Ukrainian, and we have it before the war. And so we need to have a coordinated response to that. And also domestic violence is present everywhere, and as our model of platform of Helena Helpline is based on the platform of Ireland, Women's Aid in Ireland, because they have accessible information in Romanian, because Romanian women probably access Irish service support. We based the model on them. I think we need to have a coordinated response among donors, among states, and seeing vulnerability of women and girls across Europe and across the world in a way in which makes sense. And also to have a coordinated response with the states on the budgeting, and put gender budgeting as a very important issue, because, as I said, a national action plan without money is a national action plan which you can keep it in the drawer, but we have other things much more important to keep in a drawer rather than a national action plan. So thank you, and I hope we will be able to work together on that in the future, and it's an honor to be here, and I have learned so much these days, and thank you guys for giving me this opportunity to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. It really is an honor for us to be here and learn from your experiences and expertise, so thank you for that. And really important about how national action plans, sometimes are frameworks, and what does that really mean in putting it to practice. So really appreciate that. Our next speaker is May. May Sabifu is the director of Myanmar Gender Equality Network, a coalition of more than 100 organizations collaborating to advocate for women's rights to end discrimination against women and ethnic and religious minorities in Myanmar. She works actively in the areas of prevention of violence against women, law reform, and women's engagements to bring peace. She has also co-founded the Kashin Peace Network and Kashin Women Peace Network to raise awareness of the human cost of conflict and to advocate for peace and reconciliation. She is one of the founding members of the Alliance for Gender Inclusion for Peace Process for promoting women's meaningful participation in Myanmar's peace process and serving as active steering committee member. Lovely to have you with us, May. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to share about how we push WPS agenda in Myanmar. So my primary experience is operating one of the largest gender equality networks in Myanmar. And many programs are aimed at changing gender norms or gender mainstreaming in institutions to address gender inequality in the country, and strengthening our own network to strategically engage with other alliances dedicated to the WPS. The WPS agenda is a far-reaching It is an international framework. So it is important to have the local communities understand that their country, being a member of the UN, has signed off on their membership, and all the member states have the obligations to adhere to the UN resolutions and to operationalize them. So we help them to resonate with our needs, priorities, and our local context. The 4 pillars of the WPS framework are best addressed through the life experiences and the context under which women and girls in Myanmar currently exist, and that's why we adapt to the needs of the population. So in the last 12 years, with the Women and Peace Forum, women's organizations working on the peace process have elevated their participation to the next level. And women's participation in the analysis of the application of the UN resolution has been both effective and rewarding. After the illegal seizure of power by the military last year in February 2021, the WPS found itself in disarray throughout the country. The peace component disappeared from the discussion, and insecurities emerged in every aspect of people's lives. We have to distribute equally our attention and efforts implementing the WPS framework, from participation and protection to prevention. Protection needs for women are the highest level of threat when the hunter commit their horrendous atrocities, women human rights violations, conflict-related sexual violence as a weapon of war, targeting women human rights defenders and peace activists, including kidnapping children or killing them, or holding them as hostage. Women bear the brunt of the tragic consequences of this crisis in Myanmar. Myanmar's situation has moved from bad to worse, as seen by the emergence of the WPS urgent needs. Young women are left with no security, no prospect for a secure future, and their emergency needs are not being met. The crime rate has exponentially increased. Economic hardship and poverty are pushing people to the brink of collapse and loss of human dignity. Young women are pushed into human trafficking and prostitution. Myanmar now has over 30% of its population facing acute needs. Mothers and children are suffering a great deal in our communities. That said, we are so proud of Myanmar people's resilience, willingness to share the very little that they have, and go the extra mile to help each other out. Safety and security of women peace builders and defenders remains a huge threat that has not been met by the international community. Relocation fees are just one of funding, and for women peace builders and women human rights defenders to remain in safe zones, they have to have visa status and stay permanently in foreign countries. Even after relocation, expenses should be covered by donors if donors want to keep the movement alive. WPS needs are increasingly growing on the ground. The ones responding to these needs are women human rights defenders and women rights organizations. It is very crucial to keep the women rights organizations afloat. We have been doing everything that we can in the past 19 months to fulfill the needs of women and girls. We ensure their meaningful participation. We advocate the national unity government for meaningful integration. We work for technical support and policy formulation, and the shaping and influencing of the structures. Meanwhile, we address gender-based violence. We run safe houses, provide for medical needs, cash assistance and relocation assistance for women human rights defenders, and we build a protection system for high-risk women. Amidst the ongoing conflict, the WPS framework must be used in framing all the programming in the context of the horrendous abuse of all Myanmar people. The needs of WPS are enormous. There are many unmet needs, especially in the area of women's protection. There is clearly not enough funding from the donor community for mental health support services and conditions in which women find themselves through no fault of their own. Some of the conditions include having to give birth in the jungle, unable to go to the market through a well-founded fear of the military, and a lack of feminine hygiene products. Gender-based violence and the risks associated with women's human rights-related works are one of the challenges. Another major risk is associated with family members of women's rights organizations. This risk is because the military takes hostage the families and the communities. The military targets young boys to force them to become soldiers. So we did discuss at length about the mountainous WPS needs, and we would like to suggest how international community, UN member states and donors could do to find the alternative workable solutions and relieve administrative burdens, and be mindful of conflict sensitivity in your requirements on the women's rights organizations and civil society organizations. A major reform in donors' way of thinking and working is needed. They need to be less rigid with the theory of change in a program and not be engrossed on change or fear changes from people on the ground. Registrations or MOU should not be a constraint in working with those organizations. It is additionally crucial to develop sustainable funding for strategic partnership with women's rights organizations that speak up and represent the voices of women and girls in Myanmar. There is a need to strengthen the resources and capacities of women's rights organizations and invest further in women-led resistance building to tackle emergency response for women and girls. Donors who support women human rights defenders in exile through funds must also develop policies and programs that really provide support and give security protections for women peacebuilders and other women activists. Funding for women peacebuilders must be sustainable, flexible, and long-term. The current funding is one of support, and while any funding is appreciated, the current status is only effective for emergency relocation. Long-term support through stipend for their survival is greatly needed. A fund dedicated to these needs for those fearless women must be established now. For the international community, it is limited on what they can do. Thus, to the effective, we urge international community to support our homegrown revolution for a system change for lasting peace. By helping those who are the frontline defenders of democracy and human rights, and working hard to build a genuine democratic federal country. This is one way to help bringing Myanmar to the path towards federal democracy and peace. Thank you so much.
Thank you, really, Alan. Just incredible to hear from the different contexts that we have here with us, and just how peace and contextual interlinks with humanitarian, how we're actually able to respond. And what we've heard today clearly shows how women's rights organizations are not only service providers, they don't just respond to humanitarian emergencies, they push for systematic change that is needed to ensure that in the long term, women and girls' rights are upheld and that peace in itself becomes possible. So I think it's very clear that women, whether or not are seen in these structures of what it means to be humanitarian, what it means to be development, are very involved in peace building at all levels, and they bring communities together to just discuss this and address the gender-based violence that might face, to discuss conflict, and just really clearly how gender justice and gender equality, as Jason touched upon, links together. We will have about 20 minutes for questions and answers, but before we do that, I want to take the opportunity to also mention ActionAid's research that we're currently undertaking, and you will have seen it on your chairs, and apologies, I realized I didn't put it on the panel. But we are currently looking at how the humanitarian peace and development nexus is interlinked, and specifically the role of women's leaders within that. So we have undertaken research in Myanmar, Somaliland, Haiti, and Lebanon, and May was one of the incredible women leaders who was part of that research, to really look at what is missing in the international community. Why is it that to date we have not been able to operationalize the nexus? What is it? What is the gap? And why is it that women rights organizations have been filling it, have been working through it, and we've not listened, we've not heard, and we've not taken learning from that? So we've looked and delved into that to understand their experiences, to hear their recommendations, and to really see what we can do in order to no longer look and work in silos. Something that really resonated me through the research was that women's rights organizations do not use the word nexus. The nexus is a word that was developed by the international community and donors to bring these silos together. And as Marta put it, life is life. So that we are reporting, we are launching the Nexus research in November. We're very excited about it. There's contact details behind if you do want to sign on to it for the launch. We'd be very happy to welcome you there too. So thank you for your time. I will open the floor for 20 minutes before I pass on for closing remarks to Rita. I think we'll be taking questions from the floor. I know there's potentially some questions online, but my colleague is here with us, so if you can put it in chat, then they'll be able to ask me from the floor directly. Thank you. Any questions? Or from the panel itself to any of the other panelists. Otherwise, I might take my chair privileges here and potentially ask a question to any of our panelists about, we've spoken a lot about the rule of law of civic movements as well, and what that means in the shrinking space for women's rights organizations, despite the fact that what we see now with COVID-19 so clearly, and how humanitarian crises are currently moving forward to becoming more protracted. What does that mean for us as international organizations, as donors? How can we support women's rights organizations further in order to meaningfully be in these positions and to shift power to them? So I'm asking it in both perspectives from the panel here. What would you say to donors and the international community, and also from your experiences as well? Whoever would like to take the question first. Thanks, Jason.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for all the presentations. Really fascinating. Lots to think of, and to hear of the really crucial work that all the organisations and the participants are doing. I think one thing just from your question there that strikes, and it's one thing that ourselves and like-minded are kind of struggling with at the moment, is the kind of anti-gender movement and the strength of that. And I think one thing that's come up in conversations with partners and groups that we work with, as well as other states, is the need for coordination and cooperation around this. The anti-gender movement are quite cohesive in many ways and quite effective in many ways, unfortunately, and we really need to come together and learn how to push back against the attempts to not only dilute the kind of language that we're trying to push, but the kind of programs and services that we want to see, and the issues of gender equality and the agenda more broadly. So I think that's a pressing issue that kind of cuts across all the organisations and ourselves. I know the organisations on the ground are doing this at the grassroots level, and we're doing it at the state level in terms of just trying to make what really should be a simple reality around the basics on gender equality and the agenda. It should be self-evident truths as we see them, but yeah, just to say that we're very aware of that, and we're trying to push back in any forum, be it the Security Council and elsewhere, to leave the space open for these groups to do the key work that they're doing on the ground. And just to echo some of the points in terms of facilitating that and making sure that the best partners, the ones who are doing the work already, are the ones that we're supporting. So,
Thanks so much, Jason. Don't know if anyone else would like to reflect on that at all. I know there were some comments here around what it means to have collaboration and working together, and coordination came up quite a bit from what it means to coordinate within women's rights organizations too, especially when that support is not needed.
So for us it was very important, as we are part of many networks of NGOs, and the recent events taught us that we need to go beyond our own bubble. So before we were, our organization, Community Safety Mediation Center, is part of 5 networks in Romania. So it's in part of Romanian Women's Lobby, it's part of the Rural Net, Women Dealing with Rural Development, part of the Federation of NGOs dealing with social services, part of the network of NGOs dealing with violence against women. So all the time doing all this work helped us to be intersectional, so going beyond just one field. So even if we are women's rights organizations, you need to see the details of all the vulnerabilities of each group, being women migrant, being women from an isolated community, being a Roma women from an isolated community, from rural area. So I think it's very important to go beyond your audience and to go and get to have alliances with people who are not your supporters. And I'm very happy, because I forgot to mention in my speech, I unfortunately will not be in the country when this nice and wonderful event is happening this Sunday in Iași. It's the first time we are organizing. Bucharest is always organizing the March Against Violence, but this time in Iași we'll do this together, not only with women NGOs, but with youth organizations and with organizations which are LGBTQIs, and also organizations dealing with other women's issues and poverty and social services. So it was nice to see that new perspective can be brought. And I think what ActionAid has is enormous potential of being in touch with so many partners and so many organizations with so many resources, so that I think for us that's a new opening. And so going beyond this would be helpful also with the donors, and also helpful for the member states to look on their own strategies for funding and their own strategies for new policies, and see intersectionality actually working and being applied. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. I will ask, oh, I can see a hand up, great. So, yeah.
I'm not sure if I actually need the mic, so I'll just speak from the floor. I think everyone can hear me okay? Yeah.
People online.
Okay. Hi everyone, Nafisa from ActionAid UK here. Thank you so much to all of you for attending this really important event to highlight the work of women's rights organisations. And I was just listening and reflecting to what everyone has said so far. And even though I've been with you for a couple of days, I'm inspired and re-inspired every time. And I had this question in my mind, and I think it'd be helpful for the audience as well. From Myanmar to Poland and Romania, what we're seeing is a shift in the way you need to respond. In particular, you spoke about post-coup, Mary, and from Poland as well, Marta, you spoke about what it means to shift to that operational side for humanitarian response. What have been the practical challenges and opportunities?
Thank you, Nafisa. It's like, I mean, of course, the operational challenges are huge, you know. So, like, since, I mean, a lot of the women rights organization, you know, like right after the coup, they decided not to engage with the militaries run state administrative council. So their official organizational registrations expire, and then their organizational bank accounts are no more able to use. Whenever there is a fund transfer from the outside of the country, that becomes a threat and high risk for the special branches, to come and investigate women rights organization. So, and because of that constraint, even though the women rights organizations are the one who is responding WPS needs on ground, they are not able to access funding which is available in country. Like the organizational registration, banking requirement of, under the organization's name and all the, banking system, because the military is trying to seize all the banking system, and they are trying to track all the information. And then, another constraint is a lot of women rights organizations or local civil society organizations, they have a huge lack of trust on the UN agencies and INGOs who are currently having, and assessing funding in country. It's mainly because, some of the UN agencies, head of the UN agencies, they handed their credentials to the military, and it was showcased on military's own media. And people are afraid of, if they are working or if they are getting funding from those UN agencies, what if, those UN agencies are asked to share the information about them or to share the work they are doing at the communities level. So that fear, really limiting the local civil society organization and women rights organizations to access funding in country. Sorry, the second question is? Oh, okay, opportunities. Of course, we have so many opportunities, because since the resources are scarcity, and then, we have a very small circle of network, that we can have trust and we can have a collective voice and action, Whenever or wherever something happens, civil society organizations and women rights organizations are so responsive. And it's, since our common goal is to remove military dictatorship from Myanmar political system and to build our country to be a new federal democratic, country, our common goal make us more united. And we are relying to each other, since we cannot rely the outside support. So whenever, if a woman in the jungle needs, urgent medical care, there will be message floating around on signal that, okay, who can help, where she can get the services, or who will be able to provide, the financial assistance she is needing right now. And because of the WPS needs are so huge and so urgent, actually none of the UN agencies nor donors and INGOs could not respond promptly, how we are responding right now. Because it's sometimes we literally need to donate from our own pocket money, because the huge is so urgent, she's needing, right now. And we cannot just wait, to inform the donors and get permission from them. So what we are learning, as opportunities from this revolution and from the situations after the coup is, actually we Myanmar people are so resilient. And we are so united. And then, since until today, we are not getting enough support from the international community, and there is a very few report on the media, and we are forgotten. So it's the feelings of abandonness, forgotten by the outsiders, make us more united. And there is a saying that we have only us. We have to help each other, because otherwise, nobody's care. So the opportunity is now we know how to walk together, more than ever. And then we are so united and relying to each other. And there are so many alliances, coalitions, and networks built. So that's a good thing, I think, and it will bring, Myanmar, even after, revolutions or after the post-coup, those spirits and those togetherness will really bring positive, for building the society again. Thank you.
I don't know, I will take from here the challenges and the opportunities. Well, for us, it was obvious a challenge to work with migrant women, because for us it's the first time we are getting in contact with that, so we feel like we are reinventing the wheel, because there are so many organizations in Europe and internationally working with migrant women, and for us as being an organization dealing with services on the ground and not and we are learning a lot. That was the first thing, and in the same time it was a challenge and an opportunity, because we were working for a year to setting up a helpline for our own women and girls who are victims of violence in isolated communities. So the fact that our helpline is offering information both in Romanian, Ukrainian, Russian, that helped us also to push a little bit the launching of the helpline for all the women who are vulnerable and in need. And I think it's the same message around the table, that any crisis will lead to an opportunity, because, as I told you, if 12 years ago it was not a priority for Romania to actually deal with the National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security, because it was not a clear link with the women needs and women voices on the ground. Now it's clear, it needs to be in front of you, it needs to be a person like Trump to raise all the the problems and the solidarity you are speaking. And so actually I think any crisis brings more solidarity and unity, and this was seen by the way our countries, Moldova and Romania and Poland, responded to this new crisis, and we are actually very proud of the way our communities responded to that, and we have never been anticipated the way, coordinated way in which civil society, as Poland is doing, was responding. And the fact that the government is not allocating any money was not something new, because we didn't have any public money before, so we weren't expecting we will have now. So yeah, that didn't change. Thank you.
Okay, the challenge in entering the war response field was, I think, that we, in spite of the fact that we have assistance, we have the program called Psycho Emergency for activists, for activists with the burnout, for activists who have PTSD because of the police violence. We also have an element for volunteers working in the woods at the Belarusian border when Polish military is killing people. But when people from Polish women the local leaders started working in this humanitarian aid points, it turned out that it's something that is completely different, and it's so heavy on people, in spite of the fact that, of course, we're tough people and we've experienced a lot. And many people in Polish, we're about 14 Polish women strike. We have this life experience. Many people are survivors also. We have this overrepresentation of domestic violence survivors in the movement, but still it was totally different to the daily work, in spite of the fact that many of the local leaders were providing assistance especially to domestic violence survivors. We have these lantern persons with the program, training people, community leaders, not lawyers and not psychologists, but just people to be the responders between the person and the organization, the professional organizations. So that was really getting to people at some point, and that was a huge challenge because the offer for the trainings and support was based on this difficult for us conviction that everybody everywhere speaks English, which is absurd and ridiculous, and I think a little bit offensive to say we have an offer for you but you have to speak English. In the movement we have 600 people and about 50 of them are privileged enough to speak English the way I do, and the rest is not. And that's, I think, should be a challenge for all organizations providing assistance, that it has to be done in local language, because those excluded are also very often the ones working very locally with very small teams, very small cities and villages. So that was the challenge for us, and we actually started our own program, as also psycho-emergency assistance for people working, the volunteers working in humanitarian aid points, the psychological assistance, because I think it's a huge threat when we have people working, people who never did this before, working in the humanitarian aid points, when they are not trained and prepared to work with survivors, and they express their frustration, their feelings, basically their emotions and their reactions to the way that people who came from the war zone behave. That's the thing that flows into society. That's the, not even negative, but the kind of controversial comments that undermine all the idea of helping and assisting survivors. That's a very dangerous thing, because it comes from people working at the points. So it's treated like it's a true source of information. It's not treated as a part of the frustration process. So that's the thing that I was really afraid about, and we saw that happening, so we had to provide this assistance. So that was the challenge. And the advantage or the plus of the situation have been, I think I cannot think of any. I don't want that war. It's horrible, we're terrified. And I think for us, it's, of all the fields we work at, it's the most terrifying one, because we're Poland and it's just next to us. And so this is our war. And we're so angry sometimes that we're in this war zone and we're just treated as those who do the response. But we're terrified. I'm the first generation that thought that, well, I won't be forced to speak Russian. Actually, I was the first generation, the first year in school that wasn't forced to learn Russian in school when the Russian troops left Poland. I was that year. And then it turns out that it's going to happen again, or it can happen again, that we will be again killed and raped and tortured, and because we don't want to speak Russian. So we're terrified. So I cannot think of anything good beside like meeting wonderful partners, doing things. But yes, this is the thing that we have to skip over all the time, that it's not just the thing that we do. We are so scared. I'm terrified because I see and I feel that this war can come to us, and I realize that, and I don't think that that's the thing that I would never expect that. All the other things, like fighting my government, fighting for the rule of law, fighting for democracy, for human rights. But we have the war, that is our war, and we were supposed to be this generation that has no war or post-war experience, and it turned out to be not true, and I'm so mad at this, and I'm terrified. So yeah, beside the successes that we have and the fact that we can organize, I cannot think of anything good, because war is the worst thing ever, and it shouldn't happen ever. Yeah.
Gosh, and I feel really bad stopping all of you speaking, because I am truly so inspired by Marta, by Laura, by May, and all the other incredible women who are working and leading responses in really insecure and hostile environments, and often that is forgotten. But I'm now going to pass over to Rita Eliari, who is the head of the Secretariat of the Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund. a United Nations and civil society partnership supporting women's rights organizations in peace and security and humanitarian contexts. No, I can continue, but I can also stop. Here, I'll hand over. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nikki, and hi again, everyone. So just to say that the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund, as you just said, is actually a United Nations fund. So the Secretariat is hosted by UN Women, but it is not a UN Women fund. Just wanted to, I do not represent UN Women here. So the fund has been established in 2016 exactly to respond to the things that you guys have mentioned today. But before we start, I just wanted to say thank you to the government of Ireland, who has been actually one of the two first donors to the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund when it was only an idea, and invested together with Australia. These were the two only governments who invested in an idea, which was to support women-led and women's rights organizations in crisis settings through a multi-partner trust fund. And also thank you to ActionAid colleagues. ActionAid has been a member of our board since last year and until actually the end of next year. And to somebody who was saying earlier that civil society should not be seen as beneficiaries but also as partners, this is really at the heart of our mandate. Civil society organizations are part of the decision making at all stages in our governance structure, not only recipients of funding, obviously. So thank you so much to all of you for these really incredibly inspiring comments. I have learned a lot. I continue to learn a lot even doing this work for the past 6 years. But I just want to try to summarize a little bit what you guys have just mentioned, while also telling you a little bit about the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund, obviously. But I think what has come up from our conversation today, six main points: recognition of women's organizations as legitimate humanitarian responders, money, flexibility, leadership and participation, protection, and also connection and coordination. So on the first part, which is recognition, when I started this job years ago, and as I was telling you, this fund has been exactly set up to address the nexus between peace and security, humanitarian development, and also human rights. I didn't expect to be that it was going to be a fight, actually, to convince partners and donors that women's organizations are legitimate responders in humanitarian settings, as we just very well heard. And I have to say it has been a challenge, and it's still a challenge today. And this is one of the things that we can all contribute to changing the narrative that what women's organizations are doing is not humanitarian, it's not humanitarian response, it's not critical, it's not life-saving, it's not neutral, it's not all of these things that the humanitarian sector thinks that the humanitarian work should be, and which actually is not compatible with the localization agenda anyway, because when you fund national organizations, of course they have opinions, they have an idea on what should happen. Of course they look at humanitarian, but they look at rights, they look at peace and security, they look at conflict resolution, and they cannot do these things separately, as we very, very well heard today, this morning. So this is the first thing that I have in my job daily, to convince partners and donors that you guys are actually doing the job already. And I agree that the nexus is something that we have come up with after to kind of describe an already existing situation on the ground. So in that kind of conversation with donors on why they should fund women's organizations, I think a lot of the things that have come up are the ones that you mentioned today. For example, the fact that women, and this is something that we have seen in this donor trip that you were mentioning in Moldova, and very similar to what colleagues in Romania and Poland have described, the fact that women's organizations, they already have the connections, they already have the structures, the infrastructures. For example, working on domestic violence, when the Ukrainian women and girls came into the countries, they would already have all of the referral systems to be able to support them and to provide the support, even if they had never worked with displaced people, but the mechanisms were already there. So it's very quick and efficient in terms of sustainability and efficiency to support them rather than creating something new from scratch, right? So that's really something I think that is extremely important. Now the money. The funding, of course, is crucial, and because of the lack of recognition, it has been really very difficult to raise money to support women humanitarian responders. women's organizations that do humanitarian response. The thing is that the fund has now reached a capitalization level of $112 million since 2016, since this $2 million that I was mentioning earlier. But it's only last month that for the first time I managed for the fund to unlock purely humanitarian funding to support women's organizations. Everything else has come from development money, peace and security money, which is good. But then, as you know, the world is shifting through humanitarian response, so that's where the money is. So we need to make sure that although we continue to protect the nexus, which is very important, we also explain to the partners and the donors that that we should also be able to access humanitarian funding, because one, that's where the funding is, but that's also two, because all of the money that used to go to conflict prevention, to peace building, to conflict resolution is now diverted and used for humanitarian response, which is again very critical. But we can't also forget about the preventive element of it, because that's obviously really key. That's on the money. For the flexibility, of course, I think we all have challenges as donors in general, be it international NGOs or UN mechanisms. For us, the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund, almost half of our partners had never received money from the UN before. For us, it's a very key data point that we try to track very closely, because it shows us how accessible we are, and we try to keep it as it is, or even to, of course, increase it. We also provide institutional funding to women's organizations. 16% of our grants, for example, are only institutional money that are meant to strengthen the capacities of organizations, pay for the rent, the staff, things that are very, very critical. But of course, there are challenges that were mentioned also earlier. Registration is one. The UN cannot fund unregistered organizations until now, and this is also an internal kind of discussion that we're having to try to change that, especially in countries where the authorities are not even recognized by the UN, and we have de facto authorities, while at the same time asking our partners to go and ask for registration to a government that is not even officially recognized by anybody. So these are also the internal challenges that we're trying to navigate, and in all openness and transparency. It's really not easy. Language is another one. I think it was mentioned by a colleague from Poland. We're trying to also have our funding accessible in different languages than the 6 UN languages. We're, for example, doing a call for proposal in Romanian, in Moldova, and in Dari and Pashto in Afghanistan. So we're trying to diversify also the local languages. And very quickly, because I think, am I running out of time? 2 minutes? Okay. In terms of leadership and participation, I think this has also come up. So the idea is to fund women's rights organizations in humanitarian settings, but also to make sure that they're connected to the humanitarian decision-making spaces, right? And this is also something that all of us have a role to play with in terms of the humanitarian decision-making places or spaces at the international level, but also at the national level. I also wanted to mention that the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund has recently opened a new funding window, and that's also for May to know, on women human rights defenders in conflict and humanitarian settings, that has both a protection and a participation pillar. And on the participation pillar, we also specifically fund humanitarian women humanitarian workers or responders to advocate for the need for women's inclusion in humanitarian and gender inclusion in humanitarian response. For example, recently we funded 2 women from the DRC, from Goma, to go to Kinshasa to advocate for more gender responsiveness of the humanitarian response. So this is like an open window that is open all the time. And that brings me to my other point, almost last, which is protection. So under the same window, because we also recognize that humanitarian workers are also targeted, women human rights defenders, peace builders, and humanitarian workers, we also have within that window a protection pillar where women human rights defenders from those contexts can apply for immediate support for their protection, and they get small grants up to $10,000 to fund their relocation or anything that they might need. And finally, the connection coordination element, I think we have heard a lot about that as well. I think coalition building and networking is something that is really key. We also try to promote that as well. We have a learning hub where we connect our 724 organizations that we have funded over time, so that they can also, as the experts in the field, support each other and learn from one another, which is, I think, really key, not to reinvent the wheel. I don't know who was mentioning this, but I think it's very important. So, of course, there was a lot of food for thought for all of us, I think, today, and to continue to improve our mechanisms and our work to be even more flexible and responsive to all of this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rita, for pulling all this together, and thanks everyone for joining us today, both in person and online as well. Thank you. So,